The Front Row Back Row podcast is a show where two grad school buddies discuss physical therapy entrepreneurship. I helped guide a company to an 8-figure exit, and I'm now starting my own mobile company. Brian grew his mobile practice to 4 clinics, and he's now doing $1 million in revenue. Join us as we help you grow your own business. Hello and welcome to the Front Row Back Row podcast. My name is Dr. Owen Campbell, and with me as always is Dr. Brian Wolf, and together we are Physio Growth. Physio Growth is a mastermind where we get together every week and we talk about business stuff. So we have a private Q&A for members only, and this basically allows you guys to talk to us and ask questions specifically about your business or your career or anything that you want in the field of physical therapy and healthcare. So I really encourage you guys to check it out. It's at www.physio-growth.com. So today we are going to be talking about headwinds, right? And that's a kind of fancy financial planner term, right? But it's basically challenges within a business, right? So I am a cash pay physical therapist, mobile physical therapist. So I'm not contracted with any insurances. Previously, I held a lot of management roles and regional roles in corporate PT, where it was about 98% insurance. Brian started like me about 9 years ago, and now he's built his clinics up to 5 clinics with about $2 million a year in revenue. So today we're talking about what a cash pay PT like myself, I'm learning it, and Brian's walked this path. Kind of the challenges that you face in your second year coming out, right? So the first year is nice. You have some PRN jobs to kind of keep, the bills paid while you're building your marketing. But then I recently have taken the leap to fully my own business, right? So good days, bad days, it's all on me. I don't have kind of the buffer of 1 or 2 times a week going down to the hospital and collecting a paycheck. So today we're going to talk about some of those challenges that I'm trying to plan for, right?
I know, honeymoon's over, right? That's what happens. I feel like that happens. We were talking about this. I feel like this happens with a lot of physical therapists and cash-based stuff. They realize that they go into it. And I think, one thing I'll talk about with Owen is obviously Owen and I've had lots of conversations about this, and Owen has a very smart, methodical way about him. I think it's already great that he's thinking about the headwinds of this, but I don't think a lot of physical therapists think about this and they go, oh, cash based is going to be so much better. And then I feel like a year in, they're always like, well, here are the problems with the business, right? They have the same fucking issue that we all do, which is like there's a business problem that no matter what you do, insurance or insurance-based stuff, cash-based, hybrid, whatever, there's business problems, and they're just the reality of the situation.
Well, and we always talk as cash is a great entry point for PTs, right? But you have to figure out, what are you entering, right? And are you entering a really expensive job, right? Or are you trying to build a business that you can eventually grow, right? And make it so that it's something that you get a good paycheck, and also at the end, you possibly could sell it, right? So, or we call it creating an asset. So, for anybody listening to this, that's my goal, right? Is I didn't get into business just to get like a higher paying job, because I know eventually that's, you can keep up with inflation a little bit better, but there's going to be issues that come up with that. I know that in my past, I've always seen that I'm good at, leading and creating clinics and parts of companies and things like that. So what I know is that I have the advantage of knowing that I was going to have this kind of, we call it in our masterminds, the eat shit phase, right? Both of us have sworn in the first 4 minutes. This is
it's all good. It's all good.
But it's just knowing that you are going to take a pay cut, right? And knowing that there's going to be times. So to talk about this a little bit more, budgeting is a really big thing that, I know that I need to do. So in Arizona, we have about about 6 months out of the year that we can really depend on a pretty consistent flow of patients, because people want to be here. The weather's really nice. And in most areas of the country, that's kind of similar, right? Like you have times where the population tends to be there, right? Maybe Southern California is different because it's nice all the time, but these are things that I have to budget for. I have to know that there will be months that I do not make as much money as I'm making, or I will be making, hopefully, knock on wood, in the next few weeks. So you have to kind of find plans and different banks. So what I did is I created an all another bank account that basically, so I can't see it, right? I know behaviorally that I will want to spend that money. I will want to tell my wife we have that money. And then all of a sudden that means, well, okay, it would be nice if we could do this home improvement or whatever. And I know that if I do that, I and my wife will both want to spend that money on our kids, our family, things like that. But I know in the future, we will also feel very bad that in June or July, it's hard for us to make a mortgage payment, right? So that's, I think, the first tip I always want to share with that I'm hoping works for me is that, when they say like save money when you're making hay, some farming reference, but that's my big thing coming up.
Yeah, I think the bigger thing that we'll talk a little bit about some advertising that you and I have had conversations on is one of the things that I think so many people, and I've been on so many podcasts now and we've talked about it, it's so important to have a marketing budget in general, right? And you got to understand that, like, what that marketing budget is, what you're getting for that, like, and looking at it as an overall cost analysis. If I look at what my marketing budget is, what my ability is to draw people's attention to my clinics, to my brand, what I'm doing, am I ultimately making more money than what I'm spending, right? To a degree. And that percentage should very much be yes, by the way. In fact, it should be multiple. It shouldn't be a 1-to-1 ratio because that means you're making no money. That means you're paying into advertising, right?
Yeah.
And that's where I think the PRN stuff is so key. And I think that's why people asking for referral partners is so great, because in theory, all it is your time to go and nurture that relationship. Versus when you start really getting into paid advertising, now what's happening is I'm paying and I'm paying for that time, whether it's Google ads, paid advertising, influencer, whatever that mechanism is. And so I think when you think more and more about how to generate more and more eyeballs on your business, you never want to find yourself in a scenario that you're like, hey, it's either my mortgage payment or marketing, right? So that's the first budget piece is like, all right, what am I taking home? What am I putting into marketing? And then honestly, then it's all the other stuff, right?
Well,
It's
and
all
that's
the
a lot of, and that's a lot of money, right? I mean, if you think about it, anybody going into cash, yes, obviously it's nice because you don't have, especially if you had like a bad company you were working for where it was like insurance based and they're just like, dude, I don't care. We're private equity, just go. Like you want to leave those really bad mill jobs, but like at the same time, people also think like, oh yeah, and I'm going to make like $200,000 a year. And I'm in Phoenix, and Phoenix has like all the tech industries now, all the semiconductor industries, and the market rate's like 175 an hour, 200. And if you can only see, if you just want to work 9 to 5, right, or 8 to 4, 8 to 5, or whatever it is, you're probably capped at around 25 visits, maybe a week, right? And if you do the math on that at 175, it's like $210, 210,000, right? But that takes about 3 full years to get there. And oh, by the way, that's averaging a full schedule all year in the summer, right? So all the people I know who do this, right, and have done it in this neighborhood at that price point for a while, they say their average is more like 20, right? So 20 is actually more around like $180,000, right? So then you have expenses, which are lower in cash pay, but it's 160 ish, right? But that takes you, and I'm not there yet, right? But that takes you 3 or 4 years of consistent marketing to get to, right? And then that's a pretty high salary, right? But it stops growing. Like that is the most you're going to make because of your time. You're capped, right? So unless you can market and budget, and then you have to also then say, well, or am I going to take on an employee? Am I going to have a location? Like all these other things. Well, you got to save for that. So if you're doing anything where you want to grow, or you're doing anything where you just want to sustain that, right? You have to put away a marketing budget. So you have to spend, I mean, your expenses go up after that. So it comes into this lot of all these things that you have to do, all this planning that you have to do to eventually get a job that if you just stayed as a corporate manager and had like a profit sharing deal, like you would be about the same, right? So you have to go into these things knowing that there's going to be these ebbs and flows, this pain points, all these things that you have to budget for, right? Because you have a family, you don't want to lose money, but also know it's going to take a while to get to that point. And when you get to that point, then you're going to want a pay raise, right? And you better have marketed, you better have, all this stuff. And sometimes you have to take a pay cut to be able to get that next level of pay raise, right? So these are the things I'm kind of finding out in 1 year, is that like, yeah, it's nice to have, people paying you directly cash, but when you actually play this game out and you say, okay, what do I want to do? It's a business. It's not easy. There's bad days, and you have to plan for it.
And I think to put that number in perspective, that what Owen was talking about, let's go off that like 210 number he threw out, right? Yeah. So then realize
that's if it's a full schedule every day of the year.
Yeah. And then realize like, all right, so now Owen's also got to think about that's for a mobile practice, right? Mm-hmm. So like then there's the aspects of how to continue to go past that, right? So at 210, one, Uncle Sam takes his chunk, so we'll do that at the end because you can write off a bunch of stuff. But like, this is where you're going to put in your car expenses, all this stuff, because that's your business.
Yep.
So the reality is like, no matter
it's only 25,000 miles a year on your car,
right, exactly.
Oil changes,
exactly, and not even the oil changes, but you got to consider maintenance on the cars, right? Transmission.
Yeah, I got my brakes. My brakes got to be redone soon.
And here's the thing. So now, all right, so there's $1,000, right? So then all of a sudden, then we think about it, even with the brakes, like what's the downtime on that? What are the changes? Mm-hmm. So again, like as you see from your car. So as you start to do that, there is wear and tear, and then eventually you have to, again, in 3-4 years, to Owen's point, when you hit these numbers, you're also then have to buy a new car at some point, right? So like, there's some of those aspects to it. So to spend that money on a car and do it. So there's an aspect where people might say to this, oh yeah, but I'm going to be making 160, 80, 90. It's like the reality is the money goes fast, and because ultimately what ends up happening is at a take home of Uncle Sam jumping into that 20 and just alone is 126K. And so to your point, what you're talking about is like how to budget, and here are the headwinds you have now that it's kind of like I got my full-time piece here, and that's at 100% capacity. So there is an initial feeling that I think most people don't realize, which is like truly, in my opinion, if you want to be able to grow and scale your business, you have to learn how to live on a salary of about 80K if you possibly can.
Yep.
So
that's what I'm trying to do.
Some crazy people, like the people who are billionaires out there, and again, like we call them crazy, but they've been successful. They'll say like, hey, live on 10%. Which means like 20K, like figuring that out. That's like eating ramen noodles and like living with other families. Like it's craziness. Yep. So like, again, I don't think I'm there personally on that level, but I think when it comes to like the aspect of what's important is to Owen's point, when he's saying saving money, more so what I would say that Owen thinking is cutting any type of expense that is extraneous, even when times are good. Because the reality is what running a successful business is our business does not have enough of a profit margin to, it's not tech. It's not, and people who are listening to this,
you're trading time for money.
Yeah. Like, I mean, realize I was listening to this podcast with Mark Zuckerberg. These guys have half the world or not more on their platform every month.
Yeah.
Half the world. So we cannot work with 4 to 5 billion people. That doesn't happen that way. So their scaling is so much higher on the profit margin side.
Well, and this is the other thing too, where I love where people are like, well, just raise your prices every single time. Right. And there's a guy that is probably, $10 million net worth easy. That's on my caseload. And he likes to spend money. Right. He has flat out told me, he's like, if you go over 175 an hour, not paying it.
Yeah.
Right. And because we are, even still in the cash world, we are compared to the insurance world. Right. And if there's a few people, if you have a special niche, great, more power to you. Those people also tend to like write up all on the message boards. And if I did it, you can do it. Right. But I'm telling you, man, that's not real life. There's a market. Yeah. They are looking at it. So like even the answer of like, well, just raise your prices and then you get paid more. Like it's not.
There's a point where that stops, because we've talked about it, right?
Stops, yeah.
Like as you raise your prices, like you can do it, but that market becomes shrinking and more finite. And so I think when it comes to things that for headwinds to think about that you can already start thinking about is what Owen can do is being like, all right, I'm going to live lean and I'm going to be like in this scenario. One of the first scenarios I think that works here is to get to a location, because ultimately that what Owen can do now is as soon as he starts hitting that cap of like 25 people a week, ultimately what will happen is this is where like my recommendation is actually not going to be to raise prices, but ultimately to actually bring on some overhead with rent. And again, I think that starts with always your own space, because by bringing your own space, now what happens is Owen can increase his actual ability to bring people to him, and ultimately you can then get in that 40-hour work week. You can start to manipulate the treatment sessions, like whether it's 45-minute treatment sessions an hour, and you can stack people up back to back, and you can play around with that. And here's the kicker: now you actually can build in another price hike, because you can say, hey, come to me, and it's $175. So your guy, like, there's a great example. Guy said, I'm not paying you that. Cool. Hey, I now have a location. What you can't do with a location is I can't say, hey, it's $175 to see me at my location, or $175 for me to see at your home. But what you can do is say, hey, it's $225 for me to come to your home, or you can come see me for $175 at my office. That's a scary jump for a lot of people, because what happens in that scenario is there are people that will say no, right? However, my experience is far more people just be like, well, I'll just come to you, right? And now what happens is it does exactly what you're hoping for. Is in theory, you're still going out of the office. And what you'll find is to leave the office still gets more and more frustrating to do home stuff. And that's when you can raise your price on the at-home stuff, but now you can stay pretty status quo in the office.
Yeah. And
So
that's my, game plan. And I think just knowing that I have to say, okay, money looks great, dropping in the bank account each time, but my goal is I want that first 6 months of rent paid, because I know that's going to be a struggle convincing people to drive to me. I know it's going to take me 6 months to, if I do want to start taking insurances, some of the higher paying insurances of the location, all that. So that's where I'm, right now my head's kind of at a place where it's like, find a number that is enough for the family to live off of, and then just bank everything else, making sure I have a marketing budget. Because again, when you're busy, you can't go out and shake hands, right? So you have to have some way of doing that, so that you don't have a good weeks, bad weeks.
And I would say that mechanism is a minimum of $1,500 to $3,000 per month for business owners. When you get to where Owen was just talking about it, that full schedule, right? Like you want to be. And so again, think about that 210 number. If I'm at 3K, and I would argue 3K, and that includes all sorts of different stuff, you're talking about a $36,000 budget for that, right? Now, I think that scales well. I think it scales well. But I would argue that everybody needs to have that at minimum. And so if you're thinking, okay, like $3,600 or $36,000 per year, there's one big monster. That's why a lot of people try and cut the marketing budget, because it's big. But again, if we think of Google advertising, all this other stuff, like there's other passive stuff that makes you stay busy. And I would argue that 36,000 is I know my business is going to grow no matter what without me. Number, right? So
it's the leveler.
It's the leveler. So to Owen's point about like I need 6K, like there's people who I have 6 months in the bank to pay rent, but I'm going to steal it from the marketing budget. Think about how crazy that is, because what I'm doing is it's the thing that's going to make sure that I don't have to rely on the 6 months of money I just saved as a cushion. So ultimately that's the problem, is now you're just, what happens after 6 months? Now all of a sudden what's happened is you can't do it that way. It's not a cash flow thing. So I actually think that the 6 months is more of the how to set up the office, right? Because you're gonna have expenses of like, we've had people do construction where all of a sudden now that's $20,000 to $30,000. Now there's all these other expenses. So there's a lot of things that happen when you open up your own location. And so, and there's other challenges, but marketing to me is king, because what it does, it makes sure that the one thing you don't have to worry about is that you have enough clients to pay for things. That's the key.
All right, man. Well, we'll finish that off. I think another last little plug for our growth, physio growth, or physio-growth.com. It's where you'll find our mentorship group, and it is where we talk about stuff like this. Honestly, you just shoot a question into the school group, into the chat. We either answer it there, right, if it's between Q&A sessions, or it becomes one of the topics of the week. So if you want to learn from people who have done it before, you can give us a call. Give us a call. You can look us up online. And if you can leave comments in the show notes, all that stuff, podcasts, YouTube, all that. So, all right, man, with that, we are out. Have a good one.
Sounds good. See ya.
Yeah.